Bowing to the chocolate bunny. There it is. Let's go ahead and pray, and we will continue our discourse in the book of Daniel, chapter 3. Let's pray. Lord, thank you again for another Sunday where we can come and hear what you have to say to us through your word. And through Daniel, actually, in his account, his historical account, and how we ought to view history, particularly history of the Babylonians, and what this means. I pray, God, that this would be informative, that this would be instructive, and that overall, Lord, you would be glorified as we seek to understand again what you communicated through Daniel to the Babylonians. For it's in your son's name. Amen. Okay. Part 2 of the book of Daniel, chapter 3. Let's start by looking again at some preliminary historical information regarding this particular time period. Some time has passed between Daniel's dream to Nebuchadnezzar, his explanation of his dream, and now where we're at concerning the golden image. Looking at our timeline here, again, we started in 608 BC, respectively, with the invasion of Joachim by Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar raided the capital of Jerusalem, and at this time, if we're kind of tracking Daniel's age, probably an approximation, 13 at around this time, that Daniel and his companions are taken from Jerusalem to Babylon. In 605 BC, we see that, again, Nebuchadnezzar invades Judah and Jerusalem and takes, again, his companions. Joachim starts his reign in 608. Daniel at this time is now 16. In 602, that's 3 years of training, or a couple of years of training. He's now finished that. And very instantly, Nebuchadnezzar has the dream. So Daniel and his companions went before the king. They saw that he was approved by the king, and he is honored to be part of that royal court. And then right then and there, he has this dream. Daniel explains the dream to him, and of course, he is honored. Him and his companions are honored as a result of it. That happened in 602 BC, respectively. Then we fast forward, some time passes, and we see that King Nebuchadnezzar invades Jerusalem again under King Zedekiah. This is a punishment for King Zedekiah because of his idolatry, violence, all of that sort of thing. And of course, Zedekiah is taken, he's seized, his sons are killed in front of him. His eyes are essentially gouged out. He is chained and brought to Babylon and essentially dies there, right? Oh boy, what did I do? There we go. That was neat. Now at this point, Daniel is now about 32, okay, in 589 BC. We come to 586 BC, 3 years later. Daniel is now 35 years of age, and it is at this time Jerusalem is destroyed. All the rest of the effects are carried into Babylon. The temple is razed to the ground, and it is estimated that around 586 BC, the golden image was built at around this time. Okay. We talked a little bit about the golden image and what I thought the golden image was, and based upon some historical data and some cultural data, it would appear that the golden image is possibly Marduk, the statue of Marduk. Marduk is the patron god, essentially, of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar places him in high regard. His father also did the same. Okay? And so they build and construct this statue and bring it out to the plain of of Dura, where all of these individuals are gathered in this plain, which is outside of the city of Babylon. Okay? Then we talked about the ruling class, right? Daniel brings up all of the individuals that are there present, that are probably rulers who have prominent influence in Babylon. We talked about the satraps. The satraps are the people who have authority like that of a king over specific regions, which were known as satrapies. Okay? These were different cities and different regions around the city of Babylon, and those individuals who were over them and governed over them were known as satraps. We have the prefects. Daniel is a prefect. These are people in positions of authorities that govern over certain groups. Daniel is a chief prefect over the wise men of Babylon. Okay? Again, we have the governors. Governors are people in this position. They rule over city-states and districts or provinces throughout the Babylonian Empire. Okay? Next up were the counselors described in verse 2. These people were more likely the advisors of the rulers, such as the sorcerers, the magicians, the witches, all of those individuals. We saw them in Daniel 2. They are the ones that the ruling class would come and ask for advice, ask for counsel, if they were going to conquer a particular land or what they should do with a particular people. And the counselors would advise them on such matters. You have the treasurers. Again, these people were responsible for collecting the money and using it for various projects around the city of Babylon, such as building temples, buildings, carrying with them certain effects. As a matter of fact, you could say that possibly the treasurers were involved in building and constructing this huge image, right? And getting the funding for this, which is why they're there. You have the judges. Judges were there for evaluating certain disputes among parties as it was associated with the law of the Babylonians. Okay? And then you have the magistrates. The magistrates were people who would mostly explain or enforce the laws of Babylon, such as a sheriff, and they would even evaluate certain things, right? Maybe even small cases. So all of these individuals here, and when there's more than one, there's a ton of satraps, tons of counselors, tons of magistrates that are all there in front of the plain of Dura, and standing before this large 90-foot statue. Okay. Due to the fact that Nebuchadnezzar disposed the king of Jerusalem and Israel by way of Zedekiah and razed the temple to the ground. This demonstrated to Nebuchadnezzar that he was essentially the ruler of the God of Israel. Because again, when you take over a land and destroy that land, that God becomes a part of your collection of gods, right? You begin to change the mythos, you begin to change the narrative, you add them into Nebuchadnezzar, the God of Israel, is the God of the revealer of mysteries. That is his role, right? He is not the God of heaven and earth. He is not that yet to Nebuchadnezzar. We will get there, okay? But he's not that just yet, okay? It demonstrated into his mind that his God rules over the God of Israel. And this would solidify in his mind that Marduk is indeed the Lord of heaven and earth. Okay? The statement that is the statement that all of these individuals were there, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the judges, the magistrates, they're all in the plain of Dura. This statement is important because it lets the readers, and in this case, all of the citizens of Babylon, know that the entire leadership is on one page when it comes to worshiping Marduk. Okay? They are the example to the citizens, right? We as the leadership bow and worship Marduk. You do the same. We give allegiance to Marduk. You guys do the same. All those who have small and great influence over the region of Babylon are standing on the plain of Dura in front of a 90-foot structure, who again, I believe it's not Nebuchadnezzar. Like I said, we'll talk about that later. I believe it is Marduk. Okay, let's continue here. Daniel chapter 3, verses 4 and 5. We will continue. We see this. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "To you the command is given, O peoples, nations, and men of every language, that at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, you are to fall down and worship the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king has set up or has erected." Okay. From the account of Daniel concerning this event, the herald, the person proclaiming, speaking for Nebuchadnezzar, who is given the word or the command to all of the leaders in attendance. And I would even say there are even some citizens kind of scattered in throughout this. Once the music from these instruments begins, that is, again, the celebratory music that is found within this particular event. The leaders of Babylon, that was their audio cue, their cue to kneel or bow and worship the golden image. This Aramaic word worship is the Aramaic word seged. This Aramaic word occurs 12 times in the scriptures. It only occurs once in the book of Daniel. And this word corresponds with the Hebrew word sagad, meaning to fall down, to prostrate, to bow towards, right? This particular image. This refers again to the act or practice of acknowledging or honoring someone, whether it be a human being or a god. It's the same thing when Nebuchadnezzar bowed towards Daniel. He wasn't worshiping him. He was honoring him because of the fact that he had explained the dream to him. In this context, this is talking about the recognition, the practice of acknowledging or honoring a particular god. In this case, I believe that god is Marduk. So all of these individuals that are here within this scene, within this happening on the plain of Dura, is to acknowledge this figure or a representation of the God who is presented in this figure, this golden image. We continue on in verse 6. It says, but whoever does not fall down and worship shall immediately be cast in the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. So the herald, by way of Nebuchadnezzar, gave the consequences for anyone who did not bow, praise, acknowledge, honor, worship this image that Nebuchadnezzar, by way of his servants, built. Again, if anyone did not bow, they would be thrown in the furnace, the blazing, fiery furnace. Let's take a look at this word furnace for a minute. The Aramaic word is a tune for furnace. It occurs 10 times in the scriptures, but it only occurs, this Aramaic word only occurs in the book of Daniel, chapter 3. Okay. Again, this Aramaic word corresponds with a tune, the Hebrew word that is spelled the same way. Now, this furnace, that is this kiln, is not a small one. Okay, it is rather large. Okay, the Babylonians built and used huge furnaces or kilns throughout Babylon to create many bricks to build their buildings. So it's not like they constructed this for the sole purpose of punishing individuals. This was something that was already constructed to begin with. Remember, they built temples and buildings all throughout Babylon, and these kilns were all over the place. Okay, it had an opening at the top to let the smoke out, and openings on the bottom to place bricks on the bottom to control the heat. You can these I'll show you a picture here in a second. This is one such kiln. Again, it's massive, right? You can put a lot of bricks in there, take a lot of them out, and build things pretty quickly when you have a furnace that size. Okay. So this furnace was probably located right next to the statue. It probably had been already built there, right? And then they just put this statue right next to this huge kiln that was there. Okay. So it's pretty massive. Okay, verse 7. We continue. Therefore, at that time, when all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, psaltery, bagpipe, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshiped the golden image that Nebuchadnezzar the king had set up. For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. So Daniel records that all the people present there, so again, you have all of the leaders, right? And it seems like you have citizens, again, from all the known nations that around that time were gathered here to give tribute to this golden image, that is Marduk. I believe one of the reasons why Daniel doesn't put his name here is because he's not acknowledging him, right? He's acknowledging him for what he is. He's a golden image. Marduk doesn't exist. He's a false deity. Then certain Chaldeans, chief astrologers and magicians within King Nebuchadnezzar's court, we'll talk about that when we get to chapter 4, accused the Jews, that is the rulers within Nebuchadnezzar's court, and even possibly the Jews that are around the citizens, right, who have gathered in front of the statue. They didn't recognize the golden image. Okay, let's read verses 8 to 12. For this reason, at that time, certain Chaldeans came forward and brought charges against the Jews. They responded and said to Nebuchadnezzar, the king, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, psaltery, and bagpipe, and all kinds of music is to fall and worship the golden image. But whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the administration of the province of Babylon, namely Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, have disregarded you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image which you have set up. Now remember, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they were honored, right, in chapter 2. They were not part of the king's court. However, they were given certain civil responsibilities and influence over Babylon, right? We talked about this when we looked at the classes found within Babylon. They are part of the Avilam, I believe, right? The Avilam were a certain class of people who were highly influential in the city of Babylon. Remember, they had the highest privileges and responsibilities. They were civil workers, right? They were not part of the common class, they were part of the civil class. And that gave them much influence and significance within the city of Babylon. However, if they were to break a law or the word of the king, they faced harsher penalties than that of the common person. They are going to be used as an example to not just all of the individuals in Babylon, but those who are Jews that are captive in Babylon, right? You disrespect the word of the king, you burn. Daniel chapter 3, verses 13 to 15, we continue. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in rage and anger, gave orders to bring Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Then these men were brought before the king. Nebuchadnezzar responded and said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, at the moment you hear the sound of the horn, the flute, the lyre, the trigon, the psaltery, and the bagpipe, and all kinds of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, very well. But if you do not worship, you will be cast in the midst of a furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands?" Quite a statement. Nebuchadnezzar, hearing the testimony of the Chaldeans, it begins to become upset. More than upset, you might be throwing a temper tantrum here at this moment, and orders Daniel's companions quickly to come before him and speak with him. Again, Nebuchadnezzar inquires of Daniel's companions about their lack of participation in bowing before this golden image. And then, by way of his benevolence, offers them another chance, right, to bow before this, right? I'm going to give you another chance. Maybe you didn't hear it, right? Maybe you didn't hear the directions, right? I'll give you another chance, an opportunity, right? You had a lapse of judgment or something. But if you don't worship, you will immediately be cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. And what God is there who can deliver you? Let's take a look at this Aramaic phrase, deliver. This word is shezab. Shezab. This word occurs 9 times. It's translated deliver 9 times in the scripture, and it occurs throughout this book. Okay? The word deliver emphasizes or informs us that this is one who is rescued physically from calamity or disaster. Nebuchadnezzar is saying basically, who can deliver you out of my hands from death? You better think about this, because you're going to be crispy if you don't. If you decide that you don't want to do this, right? Let's take a look at this statement right quick. And what God is there who can deliver you out of my hands? This statement is an interesting question. It is a rhetorical question, of course, to emphasize a particular point, that according to Marduk, no God can deliver you out of my hands. This is why we know that he isn't convinced yet. Okay? Your God, it may be the God of the revealer of mysteries, but he ain't going to save you. Okay? Remember, this question is not made in terms of him boasting himself for the mere sake of boasting of himself. If you went to the movie last week, right, when we saw Daniel, they kind of emphasized that, that he was prideful in and of himself because he's just this great man. That might be true, but the drive of this passage here is, again, his pride comes from the source that he believes Marduk put him in this position. Okay? Again, the statue in the plain of Dura is not him. They're not worshiping or bowing to Nebuchadnezzar, okay, or the face of Nebuchadnezzar or anything else like that. It is Marduk that is given him the kingdom of Babylon according to his mind. Okay? So Marduk holds all the cards. He is the most powerful God that has ever existed among gods. So he's saying this as an authority of Marduk, not because he's just prideful in and of himself. Okay? How do I know this? Again, let's go back to the tablet of Nebuchadnezzar. The tablet of Nebuchadnezzar emphasizes this. I am Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, the exalted prince. Who exalted him? The favorite of the god Marduk. It is Marduk, according to him, who has exalted him. The beloved of the god Nabu, the arbiter, the possessor of wisdom, who reverences their worship, the untiring governor, who is constantly anxious for the maintenance of the shrines of Babylonia and Barsipia, the wise, the pious, the wise, the pious. The son of Nabopolassar, king of Babylon, right? He thinks he's doing Marduk's work. So his statement is rather fascinating. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's statement is even more fascinating based upon his response. Verses 16 to 17. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to give you an answer concerning this matter. In other words, we're not going to do it, right? If it be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of the blazing fire, and he will. What a statement! It's not only possible, he's going to do it. He will deliver us out of your hand, O king. Let's take a look at this word here, this phrase, and he will deliver us. Daniel's companions refused to give him the response he wanted. We're not going to, we don't have to waste our breath answering this. You already know where we stand, right? I don't know why this is a big deal, right? Instead, they state that the God that they serve, that underscores that they don't serve Marduk. We don't acknowledge Marduk. We think Marduk's a phony. We think he steals from us, as a matter of fact. We're not doing it. You can bow to the chocolate bunny. We're not bowing to the chocolate bunny. Instead, they state that the God who they serve is able to physically deliver them from the furnace of blazing fire. It's not talking about salvation. It's not talking about saved from hell. It's not talking about that. This is talking about being saved physically from death. You will not roast us, right? And he will deliver us out of your hand. Again, the word deliver, again, the Aramaic word here, shazab. This word, again, is a verb. It is written in the Shepa'el stem, okay? Now, what is the Shepa'el stem? It's similar to the Hifel stem that expresses a causative force of the action, okay? That he will deliver us. He will do this. This word is also written in the imperfect. What does this mean? This means essentially, based upon the language and how it's used, that there is no uncertainty about this. It's almost kind of like they've placed their feet planted and they're not moving. There isn't a, well, maybe he will, may not. No. He's going to do this whether you like it or not. Okay? He's going to do this. Daniel's companion statement that he said to Nebuchadnezzar spoke to the certainty that God would save them physically from the hand of Nebuchadnezzar. This is their response to his answer. You can throw us in a couple times if you want. He's going to deliver us. Again, this is speaking of the physical nature of their deliverance. Let's go back and look at the Aramaic word serve, that they will not serve them, or the false deity. Pelak is the Aramaic phrase for serve. Occurs 10 times in the scriptures and 9 times in the book of Daniel. This word, again, underscores the service that a human being gives to a deity. Okay? So he says, this God who's able to deliver us, we're not going to serve your God. We're not going to bow down and worship him. We're not going to acknowledge him. We're not going to, whatever he tells us to do, we're just going to ignore that. We take a nice, huge red marker and we're just going to just mark it off, right? Verse 18, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's statement continued. This is even more amazing. He says, but even if he does not, let it be known to you, O king, that we are not going to serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Holy smokes. He will deliver us. You can bet on it. But even if he doesn't, we're not going to do what you tell us. Daniel's companions' continued replies even more incredible. He mentioned that even if God doesn't physically rescue them from the furnace, we could burn to a crisp, just nothing but plain ashes. We still won't do it. Again, this includes the 7 gods we mentioned in the introduction of Daniel when we started Daniel. That includes little Enlil, little Stubbs. That includes him. That includes Nebo. That includes all of these gods, including Marduk. We don't acknowledge Marduk. Marduk's a phony. So even if God doesn't deliver us, we're still not going to do it. We're not going to do it because we know that they don't exist. Well, we can understand why Nebuchadnezzar was filled with such rage, right? I mean, you're not only disrespecting him, but you're disrespecting Marduk. That's not okay, right? Nebuchadnezzar was filled with wrath. His facial expression was altered towards Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Oh, he's having a temper tantrum. He answered by giving orders to heat the furnace 7 times more. So nothing will remain after you're done, right? Daniel recorded that Nebuchadnezzar was rageful and that his face image, that's the word facial expression, his face image changed when he looked at them. He was so angry that his face was twisted and contorted, expressing his pure hatred. Nebuchadnezzar responds by commanding his servants to heat the furnace 7 times more than it was normally heated. Again, in the mind of Nebuchadnezzar, they were going to pay for not only disrespecting him as the king, but Marduk, who installed him. That's it. Now let's take a look at this phrase, 7 times more. 7. How do you know that? Do you have like a 7 times thermometer? You know what I'm saying? Is it? How do you know that it's going to be 7 times more? Daniel doesn't give a base temperature, right? He doesn't start off 7 times more. The average temperature is this, right? He doesn't give that. But after doing a little bit of digging and trying to figure out how hot these kilns can get, these furnaces can get, the maximum average temperature for an ancient furnace could get up to about 600 to 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, respectively, right? So basically, he wants to, even though he probably couldn't examine the temperature at the time, he wants to put this up to the max. You can probably picture the fire coming out of this thing, right? I mean, they just throw everything in it, right? Just heat the thing up, right? It's probably glowing on the plains of Dura, right? That's a lot. It's a lot of temperature, a lot of heat, right? You could probably feel it coming out of the furnace, right, as it's blazing. Verse 20, he commanded certain valiant warriors who were in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in order to cast them into the furnace of blazing fire. Well, blazing fire, that's an understatement. I mean, we're talking blazing fire, to the 10th power here. Nebuchadnezzar commands mighty warriors who were a part of his army, maybe his royal court, his protectors or whatever, to bind Daniel's companions for the sole purpose of tying them. Now in the movie, they are in the play, they didn't really do that. They just kind of put them up in the stairs and kind of threw them in. I think one of them did a flip in there, and things like that. That's not how it went down. They tied them up, binded their legs, binded their arms with all of their gear, right? So they couldn't move. For the purpose of throwing them into the furnace of blazing fire. This communicates to the reader of how intense the flame of the furnace was. I mean, it was coming out of this thing, right? You couldn't get close to it without burning yourself here. In verses 21 to 22, we see the details. Then these men were tied up in their trousers, their coats, their caps, and their other clothes. So all of their civil, even all their civil garb that they had on, they were tied up with all of it. And were cast into the midst of the furnace of blazing fire. For this reason, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace had been made extremely hot, the flame of the fire slew the men who were being carried. That's crazy, right? To think that the guys who threw, I mean, they probably died, and the result was Shadrach, they fell in, right? That's crazy. But these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell into the midst of the blazing fire, still tied up. Still tied. Okay? There's some details here to note here as we look at these two verses. One is Daniel's companions were tied up in their royal attire, all of it. Okay? And they were thrown into the midst of the fire. This was more than likely, again, at the top of the furnace. The play underscored that pretty well, where the smoke was released. Okay, so not only do you have lots of flames, but you have lots of smoke too, with those flames going up as well. Daniel also observed that the impact of Nebuchadnezzar's command on his soldiers. The soldiers got killed placing them in the furnace. That's how hot this was. Some interesting observations here. When looking at flames, of course, we have two types of things that could kill an individual, particularly with fire. One of them is thermal burns. I believe that's what happened with the soldiers, or one of the things that happened with the soldiers as they were carrying him up there. Again, there were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were three, but that doesn't mean that there were just three people. It could have been a bunch of soldiers that carried him up there and then died on the way up there. A thermal burn, again, is a skin injury that occurs when there's a thermal heat source, right? The heat raises the temperature of the skin, and of course, the result is the charring or burning of the skin, the external skin. Burns at higher temperature, of course, are more severe and more painful, and even so can cause death depending on the intensity of that burn. But you also have smoke inhalation as well. When a person breathes in harmful fumes, which destroys their respiratory system as well, which can cause irritation, and eventually could lead to death because the person lacks oxygen and is poisoned as a result of the smoke. I believe that all these soldiers died as a result of one of these or both of these. But it doesn't say, which is interesting. This is kind of interesting here, if you can catch this. The soldiers died from either the heat or the smoke or both, right? They died. They weren't tied up, right? However, what's interesting is the flames from the furnace impacted the soldiers, but Daniel does not mention that the flames and the effect of the flames negatively impacted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. By all rights, they should have been killed before they were thrown into the furnace, because the soldiers were. But they fell in, taking in all the heat while the soldiers died. Also, Daniel's companions were cast into the furnace again while being bound up. This is very important, particularly when we go on to the rest of the chapter, because Daniel's companions could not escape. They could not jump out. They couldn't run. They couldn't kick. They couldn't punch. They couldn't do any of that stuff because they were bound. They were tied up. So they fell in just like they were, landing on the bottom of this huge, intense, fiery, blazing furnace. We must stop here for the sake of time. Daniel's companions, due to disobeying the orders of Nebuchadnezzar, were thrown into the blazing furnace. There's one thing we have to keep in mind, though. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are being used as an example to everyone else that Marduk is the true God. We have to keep that in mind, okay? And this is done in front of all of the rulers and civil workers, not only the citizens of Babylon, but also the civil workers, the leaders, the satraps, the governors, the counselors, the judges. They're all there. They see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego being tossed into the blazing furnace. This is important. We have to keep this in mind. This was not only to show that Nebuchadnezzar's word is authoritative, but Marduk, who installed Nebuchadnezzar, was now the God of the Jews in captivity, and the Chaldeans ought to acknowledge. This is kind of the driving force of this chapter. Okay? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are being used as an example to demonstrate that your God doesn't exist. Marduk is the one that exists. We will stop here. We will continue next Sunday by finishing chapter 3. Let's pray, and then we will close out. Wonderful details in this text. Thank you again for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and their confronting the false deity Marduk. It demonstrates that you are the God, not just of the Hebrews, but you are the God of the Babylonians, which makes you the God of all men. And this underscores this historical narrative. We pray pray, God, and continue that as we examine Sunday morning, to continue to reorient ourselves, to focus that you are indeed true, that you are the God of heaven and earth that has created all things, and that to acknowledge you is the best thing, the thing we ought to do. Thank you again so much for who you are and for what you have given to us. For it's in your Son's name. Amen.